On October 18th, 1872, around 9 p.m., Allan Powell Surrency arrived home on his farm in Georgia to find a bewildered family and friends. Mr. Surrency was shocked to learn a series of inexplicable events had just been occurring around the house. Objects had been levitating, dishes were flying across the room, vases were falling to the floor, and all of this was occurring seemingly by itself with no apparent source. Initially, Allan couldn't believe it. However, very soon, the paranormal activity would restart, and Allan and his family would experience years of what would be destructive and often violent paranormal activity. In today's episode, we will examine the Surrency Poltergeist. The night of October 18th, shortly before Allan arrived home, his daughter, Clementine, was waiting by the train for Allan. That day, the trains were running late and it began getting dark out. As she started down the dark train path, she caught a glimpse of a strange, creepy tall man. Scared, she hustled home, and eventually, as she reached home, small stones began landing near her. It seemed someone was throwing stones, yet no one was around. She went inside, and several of her father's friends were waiting for him. She didn't say anything about the stones or the man, and headed into the kitchen. As she walked in, Clementine would hear stones hitting the ceiling of the house. She told her mother what had happened, and her mother instructed the men to head outside and look for the culprit. The men went out, but found no one was anywhere to be found. As the men came in, the strange paranormal activity began occurring inside the house. Initially, it began in the kitchen, and then seemed to spread to other parts of the home. The night of October 18th, the paranormal activity would continue throughout the night and would cease up the morning of October 19th. However, things were just beginning. October 18th was the date the family realized something abnormal was occurring. However, earlier in the year, the strange activity appeared to start in the summer with Allan's wife. One day, Allan's wife was sewing when she began hearing a noise. As she looked up, she saw a pitcher rocking back and forth. No one was around. Then the pitcher levitated and then poured the water in it out, and it flew to the ground, breaking. On another occasion, Allan's wife was eating with her children when the door closed very slowly by itself. Allan's wife looked at it and said quietly, "That was done by the wind." Then the door flung open and two windows opened and began raising and lowering by themselves. While these incidents occurred early on, the November events would draw the attention of everyone. On the afternoon of November 19th, the paranormal activity would restart, and soon neighbors would come over and witness the hauntings. Skeptics were quickly converted to believers as they saw things such as clothes and shoes being thrown around by themselves. Soon the press got a hold of the story, and reporters flocked to the home. As time progressed, more reporters came, many times from overseas and up north. On one occasion, a pint glass flew between a reporter and one of Mr. Surrency's daughters, who were having a conversation. Several investigative reporters showed up, and Mr. Surrency told them a story of a clock. The hands began spinning super quickly, and that the clock would chime 13 times. More and more people would come to the home, and eventually the train station nearby would have a designated stop for people wanting to go to the Surrency farm. It said hundreds of people witnessed the activity, with some having investigative backgrounds as well. The entity wasn't violent early on, but eventually several incidents occurred. On one occasion, one of Mr. Surrency's sons was sleeping, and an iron was dropped on his back. At the time, the iron was down in the cellar and somehow ended up upstairs. Also, one of the servants was walking with a baby and got hit in the back by a glass bottle. Fed up with the activity, the family attempted to stay with their neighbors, known as the Pattersons. The paranormal activity continued there, though, and the family would leave quickly. In February 1873, things would take a turn for the worst. Allan's son, John, walked into the dining hall and his older brother was sitting by a fire. Then, one of the heavy iron andirons began to levitate. It smashed his brother in the head, knocking him to the ground. His brother got up bleeding and dazed, but somehow it hit him again. John attempted to stop it, but was overpowered. His brother took off running, but the object pursued him and knocked him out. The next day, the family moved to the other house on the property that they had. They achieved peace there for about 10 days. Then the activity would start at the other home. In time, the family would have to abandon both homes and move across the county. Years later, in 1877, Allan died. This is when it appears that the haunting stopped. In 1925, the original home was burned to the ground. Over the years, many theories and questions have been raised with this case. This haunting has been said to be an extremely well-documented case. However, our research finds a variety of inconsistencies in various reports and sources. For example, some sources say voices were never heard, while others say laughter could be heard. Also, with so many reporters entering the house, some of the stories were found to be false. For example, one involves a pig appearing out of nowhere in the dining room. To us, the events around the home were typical of poltergeist activity. The entity never manifested, other than the red eyes that were seen through the windows. Disturbances were non-stop and lasted for years. Much of the activity involved objects being destroyed, being thrown, or levitating. The entity also followed the family from home to home, which is what happens in most poltergeist cases. The poltergeist haunts the person, not the place. This raises the question, who was the subject of the haunting? While much speculation has occurred over the cause of the haunting and the person, in 1905, a reporter interviewed John Surrency, then around age 50. John revealed he believed his mother was the source. As mentioned earlier, she appeared to experience the first events. It should be said, though, that usually teenage girls are subjects in poltergeist hauntings. One other question is why this haunting occurred. The family had lived in the home for nearly 20 years with no activity. Some suggest the home was haunted because of something like Indian burial grounds, being close to ley lines, or ancient wars that occurred on the grounds. We suspect something different might be causing this. In late 1864, General Sherman marched to the sea during the Civil War, imposing his scorched earth policies. His tactics were downright brutal, burning everything in sight, and sometimes even burning homes with citizens inside. There's countless stories of ghosts from the Civil War, soldiers appearing in full uniform in present day. It's possible somehow the entity might be linked to the death and destruction that occurred during that time. The home of the Surrencys appears to be near Sherman's path, but doesn't seem to be directly in the path. Still, the home is only 85 miles from Savannah, where Sherman's march ended. It's reasonable to assume somehow this could be connected. Perhaps in time, more info will come out on this destructive entity.